All right, well, let's get started. And this is Joe Walensky. I'm going to put a video on here just at the start, just so you can see there's a real person on the other end of the line. And I probably won't leave this up because depending on bandwidth issues, you might not see my lips moving anyways. But I'm happy to be able to present this webinar to you. Right now, everybody is muted, and I'll keep it that way, but until the end of the presentation for question and answers. Let me just see. Actually, we have a small group, and so I'll just I'll keep that muted. If you have a question, just type it into the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. And then at the end, we'll definitely have some time for questions, and I can unmute individuals for that if necessary. And let's just get right into it. I tend to speak a lot faster for webinars than in an in-person presentation. And let's just get started. The topic that I want to bring to you today is optimizing the Googleability of your content, which is something that isn't actually a special project area I work on, but it's something that I've brought into all of my projects lately. So it's kind of one checklist item that I'm always thinking about, and essentially it reflects the idea that I think if you looked at all the user assistance interactions in the world from everybody working with their various applications, I would say that more people than not are going to Google as the way to find the answer to a question as opposed to any other method. And that would include the context-sensitive help in your software. So even if you have the links directly in your software, I think people are so used to going to Google that that is where they're going to go to find the answers to a question. And I almost forgot it as we're getting started here. I want to thank Adobe for helping to sponsor these webinars. So they've been very generous in helping to make it possible for me to put the time into researching and putting on these presentations for SDC chapters. And I want to thank them, and hopefully you can check out their products like RoboHelp and FrameMaker and Captivate. Several years ago, I was speaking with a documentation manager at Google, or I'm sorry, a documentation manager at Microsoft, and he was frustrated about Google because they'd put together a new help system and done what they thought was a good job of providing context-sensitive help, and when they would observe people trying to use their software, they found that a lot of people were still going to the browser and to Google to look up the answers to questions, and so this felt like a failure. And ultimately, they decided to, in their words, embrace the beast, which was the whole idea that, well, we don't care how people get to the content, but if people are going to go through Google, then we want to make sure that we're the content that appears when they go into Google. And so they, in fact, as I'll mention again later in the session, Microsoft's a good example of an organization where their information is very easily found through Google, and it's more or less ends up being a success story for them. And if this is something that's new to you, the single most important and actually the only required thing in order to have your information visible through Google is to have your information on a public-facing server. But for many of us in the user assistance field, that actually is a problem sometimes. Often our content is siloed, it's behind a firewall. It may not necessarily be secure, but it just hasn't been put in a place that Google can find it and index it. And unless Google can find it, you're not going to be visible in Google. And so the single first most important thing that you have to do if you're interested in being visible by Google is to make sure your information is on a public-facing server. Beyond that, it's about enhancements. It's about looking into search engine optimization and identifying things that you can do in your content to be able to make sure that your information is ranked toward the top of the list when people search for your software application. And so that's going to be the balance of what I'm going to talk about. There are a few things as we go through that have a red asterisk, and those are items that that would apply to your personal information as well if you wanted visibility. So separate from a business sense, if you have your own personal blog or something like that, many of the things I'm going to talk about can help increase visibility for that. Now, if you have gotten your information onto a public-facing server, then associated with that is making sure that your information is formatted or is based on files that are easy for Google to index. And the things that are easiest for Google to be able to understand are anything that's open source, World Wide Web Consortium standard, so HTML, CSS. That is all very easy. Older technologies like using frames, although it's open source W3C based, it can cause problems in some cases for Google to be able to interpret that. But even hybrid formats that aren't widely used like XHTML, Google's fine with those. PDFs, Google used to have some problems being able to read PDFs, but most of that has disappeared. That's something that you should check, though, if you do want Google to find and index your PDFs. You might want to check to make sure if, in fact, that's happening by Googling some of that information that's in those PDFs. Where you run into problems are anytime you're looking at proprietary file formats or markup, and so some of the things I have listed here can be a problem. And Google's always changing and improving, and so the bottom line for a lot of this is you always want to be testing against what you've posted online with your own Google searches to see if in fact you're able to find your own information. That's the easiest way to check. And I want to just go through a few examples just to point out some issues related to how things appear in Google. And so one example of that is if I was in Google search and I typed something that I wanted to do, like to print a Google Calendar. If I did that, the last time I did that, you get what you see on the screen capture, which is the 3 top hits, first of all, are all from Google, which is a good thing. So the authority figure that you would expect to have the right answer, those are all in the top hits. And then when I go into print your calendar, in fact, I get the right information. So there's a success for a user there on both levels. I found an authority figure that I feel should give me the right information, and I actually get the right information. And that's the kind of output that you want. And it's not surprising that you get that from a Google procedure topic, because everything they've ever done is online and it's about being indexed and searched for. So so it makes sense that their information would appear that way. Let's look at another example, print an iCal calendar, which is a file format that Apple first originated and is widely used. And if I type that into Google, I have to go down 5 to the 5th hit before I find a document that is from Apple. And when you go into that document, or the fifth one down is from Apple, but when you go into that document, what you find is that it's iCal with respect to how developers would use it to integrate it with their applications, and not anything about an iCalendar use from a consumer point of view. That top hit, printing a calendar in iCal on Mac forums, is actually just a random presentation of thoughts about somebody who's dealing with something with respect to iCal, and it's vaguely related, but it's not in any way something that you'd want to point to as a good solution for printing an iCal calendar. And so in this case, it fails in both cases. So the authority figure isn't at the top of the list, and when you go into the top of the list items, you don't get the right information. And then a final example, print a calendar in Outlook. Again, here you have success with Microsoft Outlook. So the top two items are from Microsoft and the correct information about Outlook. And Microsoft has done a lot of work to make sure that when you look for information about the products, you find it. And that's because they've done a really good job of getting their information out there on public-facing servers in a web-based form. And so here you see the web-based version for printed calendar. And here on the other side of the screen is what you would see in the locally installed version of that same topic. And essentially they're similar with respect to the text. There's just a few variants about the way that they look. And there's a couple things I'll point out that you'll want to pay attention to. But the main thing is that for a long time, Microsoft's been good about single sourcing their content to have both a locally installed version and a web-based version. And I think that's something that's a position that all of us have to get to now if we're supporting, if we continue to support both of those ways of, if our software is still being stored locally. We need to be able to provide both types of help. Now, it isn't always the case that if somebody else is writing information about your product that it's wrong. So on the printed calendar and Outlook example, the fourth one down is actually, he has a procedure that was published apparently by the IT department at Indiana University, and the procedure is correct. It's just from, well, Indiana University. But I think this is a good example that if you aren't taking responsibility for making a public-facing version of your documentation, then you can almost be guaranteed that somebody is writing about your software and posting information online, and that's easy enough to test. It might not be the case in your particular situation, but you can look and find out, and that's a good thing to do, because the last thing you want is to have other people who don't have the authority to be the ones who essentially become the authority because it's the only information people can find from Google about your particular product. Now, being able to do that mirror content that I showed in the Microsoft example, there's different levels that you can do that. I think Microsoft is always dynamically outputting their content in the different formats. Anytime there's a change, there's updates to the web version. But for a lot of us, that may not be practical. But also for many of us, periodic conversions can be just as good. So if we're only changing our information every 3 months or 6 months, then that could be the same time where we do that single sourcing to the different output formats and make sure we have both a locally installed and the web-based version of our content. And if you haven't been working with any single source tools, content management tools, this is a really good reason why you would want to do that, because it definitely streamlines the process and ensures consistency between those mirror versions of your content. One of the things that always is a question from people when I do this is, what about content that is behind a firewall or needs to be secure? And that's a real situation. You may have content that people purchase for subscription, and that requires a login to get to. You may be involved in something where the information needs to be secure, such as documentation related to some type of defense contractor initiative, maybe a pharmaceutical company where there's secure information related to specifications and policies. So yeah, there's a lot of good examples of why that's the case. But the important thing there to realize is that even if you're not allowed to be able to publish information, it goes back to what I just mentioned a slide earlier, which is that other people are probably writing about your software. And so you can use Google to find that out, and that can be a good way to start a discussion as to what needs to be secure. Does everything need to be secure? In my experience, whether something is part of a super secret software system or not, when you're talking about printing a report or changing some options in a user system preferences, a lot of that type of thing doesn't have any secrecy associated with it, really, or doesn't need to. And so if you have this discussion, you can maybe have a more measured way of working with this. So maybe there's some things that aren't able to be on a public-facing server and other things that are. I mentioned that the two examples on the Microsoft screen were almost the same, and actually I'll just pop back to that for just a second. So here's the two examples, and but there are a couple of differences, one of which is directly visible here. So on the left-hand side, the web version, you can see that it says applies to Microsoft Office Outlook 2003, and that addresses the issue that when somebody's coming into a web-based topic from Google, they're coming in out of context. Essentially, it's like they're parachuting in and landing on this particular topic, and they don't see any of the wrapper around it that might otherwise be provided by the table of contents and things like that. And if you have multiple versions of your software, it may be that you have multiple versions of a particular topic. So in this particular case, for Print a Calendar, the procedure is similar but different for Outlook 2003, 2007, and 2010. But if you just type in Print a Calendar in Outlook in Google, you're not going to be sure which of those you're going to get. And so it helps to, in every topic, indicate what that topic applies to. And that's something we'd never do in the locally installed version. Another thing we wouldn't do in the local version that you would probably want to do with the web version is include your logo on every topic page, because branding is an issue, because that adds to that authority issue. So if somebody's coming in out of context, they're dropping in on this page, they haven't seen any other pages before this one, and they'll want to know that this page is associated with the company that they expect it to be associated with. Now, as you get into learning about how to optimize your content for Google to be able to rank it highly, it's important to understand how Google search works, and just really briefly, Google has just thousands and thousands of servers that essentially use brute force to look everywhere that it can throughout the internet and read that information, bring it into the server, store that information. Then they have a lot of sophisticated software that makes sense of that information that's indexed. And then that same smart software is what ranks that content so that when you put in a query, it brings up hits that are appropriate to what you're looking for. That's kind of the nickel tour of what happens there. Obviously, it's a heck of a lot more involved than that. But what most of us are interested in is what does it take to be able to get information at the top of the hit list. And that's something that there's no rocket science there, but there's a number of things that you have to pay attention to. Google doesn't explicitly publish the rules about how they rank certain information versus other information. You can find some general thoughts about that on google.com. If you just Google Webmaster Guidelines, you can get some general information, but they don't want people to game the system, and so they don't say that X, Y, and Z specifically are what affect that. An interesting site you can look at is that Vaughn's website that I mentioned there, where they've looked kind of anecdotally, empirically at what happens when you change certain things on websites and how does that affect Google ranking. And it's just kind of interesting to look at how much is there. But there's a few things that you can do that are fairly straightforward, and one of those is easy for us, which is to make good content that's real content that really applies to the subject at hand. Spam sites aren't good at that. They're essentially trying to trick people into going to a site. When they get to a site, it's not the information they're looking for at all. Whereas on our pages, they do get the right information. So right there, you're getting a good ranking for your organization's content as well as your personal content. That's something that's easy to do as well. Fresh content is important. That's a little trickier for us since many of us may write something that doesn't get updated very often, but this is a very real aspect of ranking. And in a way, it can make sense to have some type of changes, even if it's just dates and things like that, so that when you put a new version of your content out there at least every couple of months with something changed in it. Nomenclature, using the right terms, is rewarded by Google. That's another thing that's easy for us to do. Links to your content is something that I'll talk about a little bit later. Some technical things that you can pay attention to is that Google is going to try and index every website that it can find on the internet, but it will give priority to sites that it knows about, because that just makes it easier for it to process that information. So there's some things that you can do to put out the flashing welcome sign to Google. One of those is what's called a robot.txt file, and essentially this is it can be as simple as a single line file that tells Google where the files to be indexed are on your server, and can also tell Google what folders to not index, and Google will respect that. And that's just something that you place in the root folder of wherever your content is stored. Sitemap.xml is a little different. That also is a file that's going to go on your server, but this one has a list of every single URL that you're posting for public consumption. and that helps Google index your site. And creating this file can be kind of tedious. If you were to do it by hand, it would be very tedious. So some authoring tools support a sitemap.xml. You might want to look for that, and there's some tools that can do that. But then that's something that you're also going to want to update as you add new content. You'll also want to update your sitemap.xml. And the third item is to register your site with Google. This creates a formal relationship where you're requesting Google to index your information, and that definitely gets Google looking at your content more often. And essentially on the Google site, you'll fill out a form indicating that you want Google to index a certain site and that you're in charge of that site. Then Google emails you a token, which you then post on the server that you've said you're in charge of, and therefore Google knows that you're actually the person in charge of that site. All three of those things you can find information about just by Googling exactly what's in those bullet points. Some other items, metadata, community building, and then testing your information are all important items. There's also the item C supplemental handout. That was actually a separate item that I've included as a slide, and I'll get to that one in a minute. The metadata that is part of just the general good principles of putting together a web page helps Google to be able to index your information, and if you haven't been doing that, you should think about doing it. If you're using a help authoring tool, it may already be doing it for you, but you need to check. So you want to have a good title, you want to have a good description for each page of content that you're posting, and you'll also want to include keywords about the content in that page, and possibly do some experimentation and study to make sure that you're using good keywords that people may be using when they're looking for your information in Google. And here's what was the supplemental handout. These SEO guidelines were ones that were part of a resource that I had through my ISP. And I found them to be kind of interesting and useful, so I thought I'd put them in here. It kind of gets into some nuances of metadata, again based on sort of anecdotal best practices, but you notice in proper description tags, so I mentioned you'd want to write a description, but it shows that the sweet spot for that description is between 25 and 35 words. For keywords, 5 to 10 keywords is the sweet spot. And it turns out that these are the types of things that Google pays attention to, again, to differentiate what we're doing from spam. And one of the things that spam sites would have is either no description or a 70-word description, no keywords or 50 keywords. And it's the main thing to keep in mind with all of this is do whatever you would think is appropriate for your customer, and that'll probably work best for Google indexing as well. All right, I'm just going to take a drink of water for a moment. All right. Now I've been talking Google, just constant Googles. I can't even say it fast, but there's obviously other search engines, and Bing is Microsoft search engine, which is also used by Yahoo, and thing to recognize is that even though these search engines don't have the same size market share, when you're talking about millions and millions of people, they still support millions and millions of people. So you may want to make sure that you're indexed in other engines as well. So Bing has its own registration procedure, Yahoo does, and you may also be interested in knowing that there's a lot of very niche search engines that are directed towards specific industries. And you might want to look around to see if there are certain search engines for your industry or your product category. And if so, you'd want to make sure that you're represented in those search engines. Now, as you start working on your search engine optimization, you want to do a lot of testing and you want to get feedback on your work. And so using Google Analytics and seeing how traffic works, what pages people go to, what keywords people are using and accessing your site. You can get all that information and it's very valuable. But in addition to that, it helps to be active as opposed to passive and make sure that your customers know that you have content out there, because that helps get links to your site, which then gets rewarded by Google. And so if you, let's say you have a documentation portal, or if you have a new documentation release, possibly you can send an email out to your customers that alerts them to that and includes a link. And those customers will probably click on that link just to see what's there. And so immediately that's traffic that Google is going to recognize, and that helps to raise the profile of your content. We also have a lot of social media areas that can contribute to our visibility in Google, some more so than others. Facebook is used by some organizations to have a product page. However, Facebook is very siloed, and Google is not really able to index that very well. On the other hand, YouTube gets indexed very well by Google since Google owns it. And so, in fact, if you have any instructional videos that you host on your own site, I definitely suggest putting those on YouTube, because then Google is going to be will index that information. In fact, if you have a video and you post it on your site and you post it on YouTube, I guarantee you that more of your customers will find it on YouTube than on your own site, even if you have links from your software to the videos. So definitely consider YouTube. And LinkedIn is kind of in between. If you happen to have a company page for LinkedIn, you might want to consider having a services page within your LinkedIn company page that has links to your documentation. And Google's able to index that now. Didn't used to be, but now it's more open. And other elements are also going to help contribute to visibility. Google doesn't specifically read Twitter feeds. However, if you or others include links to your content through tweets, then that is going to result in more people clicking through to your content. I have one bullet point there, aggregators. If you're in an industry where there's sites that keep track of resources about the industry, then maybe you wanted to see if you can get your documentation links added there. Maybe your documentation portal could be represented on this aggregator page, and that'll help build visibility. Also recognize that While Google translates content into other languages, there's also language-specific versions of Google search engines that will pay better attention to information that's in the native language. And so if you had a documentation portal page again, you might want to translate it into different languages because that will then be more highly visible by people searching through their native language Google interfaces. So for example, I might translate my documentation portal into German, and then somebody in Germany using that would find that that's ranked, that page would be ranked higher than an English version of that page. And then the final item I wanted to mention is to let you know, if you're not aware of it, that Google has what's called a custom search, which is freely available, where you register your site and then Google gives you some code for putting a Google search box on your site. And when somebody is on your site, let's say your documentation portal, and they type information into the Google search box, it's going to give a Google-powered search of your information. So Google will have been indexing your information and then tagging it so that it can also be part of this Google search. And it's really powerful. It's more powerful than any third-party search engines that I've encountered. And if you're looking for a good way to have people search your own content repository through your own portal, that's definitely something to look into. Now with the free version, you get some ads at the top of each hit page, but there's also a paid version where you can do it without the ads being included. And then my final point is to realize that mobile is making this an even bigger issue because while on the desktop we still do have the ability to move through information with our mouse and click through hierarchies and search for information in that traditional way. For mobile devices, voice search is increasingly popular, and the ability to type in long phrases is more difficult. So you really want to evaluate the Googleability of your content through mobile in addition to the desktop. So I wouldn't just leave this exercise as checking out things through your desktop browser. I would get multiple devices and type in information about your products and see how that information is presented to you through those different user interfaces. All right, well, that brings me to the conclusion of what I wanted to talk about. If you have any questions, you could type that into the text box, and I'll wait a few minutes to see if there's any questions. I want to mention that our conference is coming up in a couple of months in Newport, Rhode Island, and so I'd like to invite you to participate. It's October 27th through the 29th in Newport. Should be a lot of fun, and it's more in your part of the country, so possibly that'll be of interest to you. It's a fun city to visit. We'll be going on a mansion tour on the Sunday as a group and enjoying the city that day, and then there's 2 full days of educational sessions. With the promo code that I list on the screen, the price for the 2 days ends up being just $695. So it's a really good way to meet with your peers, learn some new things, and have a little bit of fun. I also included listings of my resource directory and blog, and you can also find information about courses and presentations on there. I want to thank Adobe again for their support. The promo code is just STC, so it's listed on that slide. And by the way, I'll make sure that your chapter leaders get a copy of the slides and distributes them so that you have that available for use after this presentation's over. And that STC, that promo code of STC is good through next Tuesday. Looks like we're about 40 minutes in or so, which is about what I was planning for this presentation. My email address is, well, it's just joe@walensky.com is probably the easiest one, but it'll also be listed on the slides. If you want to send me a question by email, I'm happy to answer that if I'm able. And other than that, I guess we'll, well, let's see, question, we have a question, does Google Token work with WordPress? And yes, the answer is yes for that. There is a place in WordPress in the settings for making that connection. There's also a tool called Google sitemap.xml, which is a plugin. And Google sitemap.xml will build that based on your WordPress site. For the Google token, essentially you're going to have to still register your site the same way that you would otherwise. Let's see, WordPress.com doesn't take plugins. Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned that because I only work with WordPress in hosted environments, so then I don't know the answer to that question. Sorry. All right, well, I think I'll end it there, and appreciate you taking the time to get this together. Hopefully you got some useful information out of this, and hopefully we can meet together one-on-one, face-to-face at some future event. In any event, good luck with all your projects, and that'll be it. Thank you.